started. Just so you guys all know, too, we're also live streaming on GoToMeeting and Facebook Live, and when this thing is all wrapped up, we'll post it on County YouTube, so we can all revisit it, share it with people who were not able to be here. A lot of people have been, we got a lot of replies back from the invites we sent out. A lot of people are on vacation right now, and so like there's a lot more people watching on the live stream than are here, but I definitely thank all of you for being here and participating live in this. Like I said, we'll just give people a few minutes and we'll get started with our presentation. And then lead into some open discussion about what we're talking about those changes. Again, thanks. Great to see you guys all here. And the diversity of different assessors and assessor local government related, all people who have vested interest in a good assessment policy and stable assessments. And if you guys don't have one, there's these packets that kind of go over some of the stuff we're going to talk about. As far as the live stream goes, it just sounds better through this mic if we just talk. And everyone here, like at this volume, or does anyone want me to wear a mic?
Yeah, if you speak up just a little bit more.
Yeah, wear the mic.
Is that better? Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Test. Test audio. Okay, test audio. All right, test audio, good. Katie? Chris, can you make some more printout? Yeah. And just add some else when you have one. All right, guys, we'll get going. Again, thanks so much for coming. Is anyone here from the DLGF? Kind of what we expected. We did invite the DLGF folks. One of the messages we got was that they will appreciate us meeting, but weren't going to send somebody. We'll get into that. I just want to talk briefly about today's agenda, how this meeting is going to work. We're already pretty much through our welcomes. But the idea is we're going to talk a little bit about just discourse in general, context for some of these changes, and then we're going to talk about guided discussion of the major changes, a couple minor changes, get into like the technical, some anecdotes, and then open discussion from everything that you guys may have brought here, questions you guys have, things that we may not have seen. This presentation is mostly focused on the biggest changes and the biggest tax policy problems that are both addressed and not addressed in these changes. But like I said, there'll definitely be time where we can all just speak openly about whatever issues we have with these.
So, without further ado, in your packets, this section here is from the DLGF, where they kind of go item by item and list things as a technical change or a substantive change. One of the reasons they said they will not be joining us today is they feel that these changes are not substantive. As you can see, they've marked several as substantive, and this is just one section of it pertaining to ratio studies, annual adjustments. They actually have quite a few substantive changes. So that's one conflict. It seems that they're aware they're making substantial changes, but don't want to talk about them here today. That's I think from what they told us, we are not seeking to make significant substantive changes to current laws more appropriate for future rulemaking, but we're going to talk today about some of these are pretty substantial, depending on how they're carried out. And anyone who wants this, we'll send the presentation out to anyone on the sign-up sheet so you can follow the links to that document. This is just more stuff that I don't want to spend too much time on because I feel like most adults know this kind of stuff, but we included a history of our conversation with the DLGF that really has not been very forthcoming with information, with plain acknowledgement of plainly worded things. This is actually a IBTR case ruling about who can appeal. And what is interesting is what they say is what a statute does not say is just as important as what it does. The omission is likewise viewed as by the courts as intentional. And this just kind of goes to what you don't say or what you don't respond to speaks volumes. And for those of us who have been trying to get clarification for the last 2 years leading up to this, it has really been a culture of non-response, and the responses we have are either not in writing, not willing to be put in writing. So I think it's important to understand that when you're dealing with other people, especially in government, you can't just refuse to provide any insight, comment, motives for a lot of these changes. So that's kind of important. We feel that a lot of these decisions should be guided by evidence, and a lot of them seem contrary to. That's my I think important to this is expert testimony. There's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time working to get good standards in place for assessors, and I think that relying on IAAO, for example, International Association of Assessing Officials, have a lot of very competent people who spend a lot of time trying to get these guidelines to where they currently are today. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's just acting ethically, basing your decisions off of communication and written standards. And so today I think that's the point of having an open discussion, is something we've been trying to facilitate for a long time, hopefully with the DLGF, and we are disappointed they are not doing this today. But the major impact that these changes have are with the annual adjustment process. And just to kind of go over that briefly for those of you who are not in assessor land very often, anytime you have a sale, there is a ratio of that sale's assessed value to its sale price, and the analysis of those ratios is what the state uses to validate assessments. And there's all sorts of standards and guidelines about ratio study, particularly by the IAAO. They produce a periodic guide to ratio studies and what is generally accepted in the appraisal and statistics community. So, again, the IAAO is probably the most credible organization with respect to technical standards. They have a technical committee, people who specialize in making rules for oversight agencies and for assessors. I was here since 2008, and during that time, the IAAO Technical Standards Committee, in conjunction with a lot of research, has implemented some basic statistics into the assessment process. And that was a huge leap forward. We'll get into what those changes were made at that time. And right now, because of those changes and the push to get generally accepted statistics involved with assessment, we have the standards we have now. And although the DLGF is proposing to undo a lot of that with these changes, this is still the IAA standard. The IAA continues to work on technical standards and advance the process, and I think we should be not in odds with that. But so that being said, that's kind of the background. We have this ratio study that the state uses and should be making guidelines for everyone to follow, because the ratio study is the basis for level of assessment. And so this is the current standard, the one that's in writing, the one that's been in writing since the 2011 annual adjustment rule. And I think the most important part, the biggest change was, instead of using the middle ratio for an area, we're going to use a confidence interval that has to do a lot more with the entire data set. It takes into account variability. And so it still talks about the level of assessment being market value 1, no difference, plus or minus 10%. But it says, however, confidence intervals, rather than the median ratio itself, will be used to determine compliance with this benchmark. From someone who's used both the middle number and a confidence interval, the confidence interval is a much more stable, reliable, accurate statistic that incorporates the entire data set rather than what happens to be the middle number. So this was a really good change, created by the IAAO Technical Standards Committee and adopted by the DLGF, put into 50 IAC. All right. Although the current DLGF administration does not recognize this, and we'll get into that. But it seems really clear that that is the current standard right now. Like I said, if you look in the very beginning of these proposed rules, they change where instead of adopting the 2007 IAAO Guide to Ratio study, we adopt the 2013 IAAO Guide to Ratio study. It says that assessors can use this, that it's going to be adopted. The DLGF likes to keep a lot of ties to it because it's a very credible document created by the world's best assessors. It's really hard to have any sort of code that really openly defies it. So what they do is adopt it, but then contradict it in important ways. Here's what it says about, I've included some parts of the IAAO Guide to Ratio study. It's only a 60-page document. It's pretty readable, but I've included some important features of it. Confidence interval around the measures of level provide indicators of reliability of sample statistics as predictors of the overall level of appraisal of the population. And this next sentence is super important because remember, they're judging assessors and determining whether their ratio studies are compliant or non-compliant. Note that non-compliance with appraisal level standards cannot be determined without use of confidence intervals or hypothesis tests. Another way to, as someone who I'll get into a little bit from the IAAO Technical Standards Committee has said, another layman way to put this is you're innocent until proven guilty. And I think you're compliant until there's proof you're not. And what the DLGF is saying is, even though there's not good proof, we're going to call you non-compliant based on this one middle number, even though the confidence interval doesn't necessarily say that. And I think, again, they're not here to justify their position, but I think it's because when you have innocent till proven guilty, people get away with stuff, and they don't want people to get away with stuff, which is understandable, but the solution is not to go to a guilty until innocent system. There's ways to mitigate it that we'll kind of get into, but that's an important note that the IAAO says you cannot reject a part of a ratio study without evidence, and I think that's a good policy to have. Again, this is also from the IAAO. This is pretty self-explanatory. The primary measure of importance to the local assessor is a confidence interval. Again, I think that speaks for itself. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's true. It is the most powerful tool we have to verify where our assessments are at, and if they're not where we're at, make a solution to where they need to be. It's a mathematical tool, and it's very important. One of our discussions with the DLGF over this ended with forget confidence intervals, is what they told us. And when we explained that is a nonsensical response to the IAAO Guide to Ratio studies, they said, well, these are our rules. We can change these rules. And guess what they did? We'll get into that. This is a chart that the DLGF, is included in the IAAO 2013 Guide to Ratio studies. that talks about when you reject part of a ratio study and when you don't. Notice case 1. The confidence interval, the point estimate is above 90%, and the confidence interval spans the entire, test range. So no one is arguing about that. Everyone's saying that that should be in compliance. There is no reappraisal order. Case number 3, the point estimate is low. The confidence interval does not straddle 0.9. Everyone agrees that should be rejected. There should be a reappraisal order. The main disagreement is in number 2. Notice the point estimate, which they're saying should be the basis of all this, does not exceed 0.9, but there's variation in the sample size, and you can't reject at the 95% confidence level that it's compliant. So we're saying you do not make them redo this. And I think what the DLGF is worried about is consistently having a situation where things are skewed to the low side but can't be rejected. And if you actually read the passages that follow this, they describe exactly what to do so you don't have that. They talk about making a 5-year plan, making a 3-year plan, getting to a point where you're honest about where you're at with confidence intervals, and then you make a plan so both the point indicator and confidence interval are compliant, because it's just a tool. It could be misused, but it's the most powerful tool we have to get to the places we need to be. So again, current code pertaining to level of assessment is focused on confidence intervals. Our mathematical, statistical departments in our universities use these confidence intervals. Our IAAO international group, the best assessors on the planet, have a committee that is recommending the use of these confidence intervals, and it just seems that we should also use them. Pete Davis is someone who used to serve on the IAAO Technical Standard Committee, who has been an integral part of incorporating confidence intervals into assessment, and also separating out guidelines for assessors and for oversight agencies. This is just what, his quote from it. I place stronger language in ratio study standards to enforce the use of confidence intervals. And I said literally what I just said, separated out standard to adjust jurisdictional ratio versus oversight issues. And then basically confirming that our concept of how that chart works, when you reject it, when you don't, is accurate use of confidence intervals. This is part of the handout in your packet. 50 IAC 27.4-5, remove confidence intervals based on incorrect use. This kind of gets back to the honest discourse. For years, they've been saying we're not using it right, we're not doing it right, we have our own mathematical standards, won't share with those what those standards are. And they're just saying now we're just going to delete the mathematical concept of confidence intervals from 50 IAC because some counties aren't using them right, despite the fact that we will not answer any questions about how they are supposed to be used. And to me, that's like gets back to honest discourse. We can have a disagreement about how mathematical concept is employed. I just don't understand deleting them all, despite the obvious mountain of evidence that they should be used. And so, my generation, I love memes. I don't know what the DLGF's process is like, but this is what the proposed changes do to confidence intervals. And memes aside, here it is in writing. They did a find and replace. Every time the word confidence interval or something that described confidence intervals was pegged, they just deleted it. I like that they deleted this. Confidence intervals are a way of capturing variation in the sample size of properties. Delete. I mean, you can delete this stuff. It doesn't make it not true, though. It doesn't make the math go away. It doesn't make IAAO stop using it. The rest of the world is going to turn, and we're going to delete all this stuff. And one thing that I know a lot of assessors and contractors talk about is, the DLGF isn't necessarily consistent with how they treat assessors versus contractors, contractors versus other contractors. And to ensure a level playing field and fairness for everybody, we need a written standard for level of assessment. But instead of that, we're deleting all of the written standards for level of assessment and replacing it with that top item in bold. The department may use necessary measures of reliability to determine ratio compliance. In other words, we're going from a written standard to we will do whatever we want. And that's the major problem right now is they don't have a written standard they're willing to follow and they do whatever they want. So this is just putting that in writing. At least now we have good stuff on the books. And we want to keep it in good stuff on the books, so when they do whatever they want, we can say, no, this is the written policy. There needs to be a written policy. And I'll show you why. But first, in addition to removing confidence intervals and a written level for how things are going to be assessed in Indiana, we're also removing, this is kind of vague wording anyway. It says our software we use may support the calculation of confidence intervals. They didn't have to do it anyway, but it just seems egregious to also not only remove the concept from level of assessment wording, but also get rid of even the concept that our software would do these calculations for us. I think messing with the software, so it's not just removing it from the standard, they're also like restricting access we have to the tool, which doesn't make sense. Another place it was just deleted. And so one of the issues of why the DLGF doesn't like confidence intervals, we'll get with the kind of how they're used specifically, but every year in Indiana, every sale that happens, we make every sale get reported in a disclosure to the assessor's office for the purpose of calibrating mass appraisal models, facilitating mass assessment, right? And so every year we give them these sale files, which ones we're going to use, which ones we're not going to use. The reasons for this supposed point indicator method of determining level of assessment is for consistency. There needs to be consistency, and they don't like big confidence intervals not necessarily being consistent among counties. It seems like a bizarre point because, again, the data that we're using to set values has no trimming policy in writing. And that's huge. Anyone who's ever been involved in statistics knows the importance of having a reasonable trimming policy. For example, has anyone ever been on a diet? Sure, I'm going to assume some of you guys have. You know, it'd be pretty impressive if I said 100% of people on my diet lost substantial amounts of weight, worked beautifully, 100% of them. Isn't that misleading if I took a sample of 10 people and it didn't work for 7 of them, and I just didn't analyze those people? It's like, oh, the 3 people, you know, that I chose to analyze, 100% lost weight. I mean, it's totally misleading, right? And that is the system of data manipulation that we've kind of built into the process, because if we don't have confidence intervals and we have to paint this pretty picture of where we are every year, this is the fudge factors in the trimming policy, or in this case, complete lack thereof. We've been urging them for a long time to have some sort of data standard. Get into why that's particularly egregious. Of course, IAAO has a, in their guide to ratio studies, has a standard on your sample size. How much data can you delete and still be credible? Well, it depends on your your jurisdiction, but no more than 10%. They talk about having, a statistical outlier policy, a common sense outlier policy, great freedom to determine what sales you're not going to use. But when you start deleting more than 10%, you have a problem. Unless it's an extreme case, 20%. And I guess I don't know, this is an international group publishing these, is an extreme case a rural community in Indiana or like Hudson, Kenya. But I would think that by reading this, most jurisdictions in Indiana are going to be between 5 and 15% is the amount of sales for consideration you're not going to be able to use while remaining credible. And it's important to use a high percentage of sales. Like I said, if you can delete as many sales as you want for any reason, the result cannot be considered credible. We have examples. I'm just just want to convey what IAAO says. The DLGF policy on trimming is not written down anywhere that we could find, but you will find it on the sales disclosure file they send back to you. We've asked them for their internal policies on trimming. They've mentioned to us that it would take a public information request to get that information from them. We did submit that request, and they have not been transparent with that, but we do have access to some of them from some assessors, and they have returned some ratio studies, either some data or the ratio studies, but not the sale files. But at the bottom of all of our sale files, they give back to us with how much sales we said we're going to use. And I'll give you a snippet sample later. It says you have to use at least 35% of your sales and or 55% that are marked for consideration. And if you don't, we might talk to you about it. The idea that the standard is around 55, maybe 30, and again, not all counties are there. That's their kind of loose written standard. my impression is there's, again, they're not giving us this information, but that there's a lot in the 30s and 40s. And what does it tell you if you have to delete half or 2/3 of your sales for valuable consideration? What does that tell you about the effectiveness of your weight loss program or your ratio study or whatever it is? It really is mind-blowing that the basis for values in assessment could range from on a data set that might use all the data, might use a fraction of the data, but the idea that these need to be consistent is debunked by this. This is clearly not a policy that is focused on consistency amongst counties. And such an egregiously bad policy, it's not even published anywhere, except on this one document that only goes to assessors that you need to wait a long, long time to get in a public information request and still haven't got. I don't know, many of you had counties where West Bennett came and gave you an introductory visit. We took that opportunity to ask them a lot of these questions, including how come there's no trimming policies, and why is the DLGF complicit in mass chunks of data being removed? And they mentioned they don't really have the staff to provide effective oversight over that part of the process. My first deputy, Jackie, and I have looked over a lot of counties. It doesn't take very long. We've looked over most of them ourselves, and so we don't think that excuse holds a lot of water. So why are people removing sales? You know, what kind of sales? There are good reasons to remove sales. Not every sale could be using a ratio study, you know. But the reasons we're removing them are because we don't have good values for the most part, and it would be too hard to make good values. So we have this culture where even at classes, you know, we all take assessment classes. I can't tell you, maybe the assessment room can agree or disagree with this, but how many times someone will bring up at a class, hey, this property sold for twice, 3 times what I have it assessed for. Well, don't use it. We don't really look at those reasons. Just do your best. We don't look at that stuff. But if you look at it, that culture of just get rid of it and make up some reason produces some very ridiculous things. And this is, we're not trying to call it any counties. This is just stuff from actual 2018 ratio studies, reasons why sales were removed. We tried to pick ones that represent much more than that. I mean, just because this one example is used doesn't mean there's not hundreds more removed for that same reason. This is an interesting thing. People used to write on the ratio study, property sold for $100,000 removed. Doesn't tell you very much why it was removed. And the DLGF said, hey, we're gonna crack down on this. We need to know not just what it sold for, but what its maybe value was or why. So now we have counties writing, it sold for $20,000, but others sold for $25,000, so we removed it. And I think this might be a joke that county assessors play on the DLGF. I think a lot of county assessors will try to squeeze in the definition of market value for reasons why it was removed. Here's a good one. Sold for $87,000 when similar property sold for $87,000. That's literally the definition of market value, and they removed that sale. So yeah, none of those really seem valid. Here's some other ones. Sale amount for less than minimum of neighborhood. You're not supposed to create all these little trimming policies per neighborhood where you just ignore sales that you don't like what it transacted for. It's interesting to me that counties that are using half their sales aren't using the other half because they know what they should sell for. If half your sales aren't selling for what you expect, maybe the problem is with you or your process and not the sales. But these are just samples from a few counties. Like I said, and Tippecanoe uses some of these too. I mean, we're not totally exempt from this. This is another one. Uninformed buyer, paid $340,000. Uniform buyer, another. They did not get the definition of market value. They removed it because it was too uniform. So ununiformed, uniform, motivated. I mean, all these things. These single words are reasons to remove 2/3 your data, half your data. So now, again, no consistency to this process and no oversight to these egregious reasons to remove chunks of your data. I have to share my personal favorite. I'm really glad these people snuck this one in. Buyers were willing to buy at price offered. I was like, that is literally the definition of market value. Like, supply curve meets that demand curve. So yeah, that was just removed, because it was a transaction, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, realtors, POA, that $450,000 sale was removed because it was appealed years ago. Again, maybe they shouldn't be used, but when you're removing half your data and basically these are your reasons, this is a major problem. And deleting math will not solve this. There's no amount of math you can delete that is going to fix these egregious reasons and the assessments that make these reasons a necessity for a lot of assessors to get their ratios approved. I want to talk about two quick case studies. My first deputy before Jackie was a woman named Katie Mullender. She's off somewhere tropical right now and can't be here, so she gave me permission to kind of say her piece and give her case study for her. I helped her a lot with her campaign. She was recently elected Hancock County Assessor. It was very difficult parsing out fact and fiction in this campaign because they hire a contractor called Nexus to facilitate their reassessment work, their annual adjustments, and their appeals. And it was interesting to see these large six-figure contracts, yet all the employees in the office felt hurt by the campaign. You know, Katie was running it, I'm gonna do this myself. I know how to do this, I'm gonna do it. You know, and her staff at the time, before they were her staff, was saying, no, we do this work, not contractors, it's us. And it was weird, like how can they be doing the work, but the contractors get paid for it? It seemed like a conflict, like something wasn't right. So one side was not being totally candid with what was happening. And so when she took office, this is the bottom of that sales sheet that they give you that says you got to use 55%, 35%. So here's where she's at. 40, almost 50% total, almost 55 of those for consideration are being used in her evaluation process. And her question to me was, oh my God, look what we've been deleting. Look what's been deleted for years and years. They have a culture where her staff wasn't wrong. They were doing a lot of the work. They were trained to get rid of sales that had large discrepancies, and they ended up where for years they've been paying a contractor to basically run a report for them with like half their data. Her question was, what do we do about this? How do I improve my models? How do I make it better? How do I get away from using half my sales to where I can use 90% of my sales? What do I do? And we have conversations like this all the time because pretty much the heart of our job. And unfortunately, because the DLGF hates confidence intervals and math, they can't be a part of this discussion because they don't want to see the candid nature. What happens if you include those sales? Where do you get? And how do you fix that? They don't want to be a part of that. They want to see a pretty picture based on a middle number with most of your stuff deleted that makes it look bad, so they can say all 92 counties are very uniform and equal and we're moving on to next year. Meanwhile, you have contractors picking up six-figure paychecks who've been working in counties for years on end and very poor assessment uniformity to show for it over the years. And a lot of assessors who claim to be doing the work themselves anyway, that these contractors are obligated to do. So this is one where we were really shocked to find out that the assessor's office was right. They were hardworking, they were competent, and they were paying a contractor for an ambiguous scope of work. Here's another case study. I'm actually lucky to have Ginny Whipple. I know before Tyler came into this county, Ginny was here. We talked about before that the struggle pulling Indiana out of a cost system into a market system. Those first annual adjustment cycles were very difficult, and a lot of times it's hard to blame counties for bringing in outside expertise. I started this process in 2008 under a contract the county had with Tyler Technology. The late Jim Flake kind of trained me on how this stuff works, and that's one where I feel like normally I'm very much against contracting. I feel like assessors should do their own work, but that was a positive contract in that I don't feel like Tyler had a lot in it, in that they were acted as a consultant, they got a good fee for that year, and they trained us how to do it. And that was the one and only year we used them. Because after that we were self-sufficient. The contract worked, it was win-win. We paid more that year, and we've been sufficient since. I feel like that's a good use of contracting. That's an example where it was used effectively. I don't think that, if you have an assessor's office that hasn't performed the core competency of its work, valuing property, listing property in decades, I don't think that was what these contracts were set up to do, and I think that's where you get 50% complicity and 50% of sales being used over long periods of time. And I'm not immune from this. This is out the bottom of our sheet. We started with 74 total, a little over 80 for valuable consideration. We're not in that IAAO safe zone yet. And again, how we're going to get there though is a candid discussion about where we're at, using the best mathematical tools we have, and developing a path forward. There's no amount of sales we can delete that's going to fix this stuff, or math we can delete from 50 IAC. So as far as trimming policy goes, for those of you who maybe come from a county or work in a county where we're using a dismal percentage of sales, it's not an overnight fix yet, and thankfully the DLGF hasn't been very good at following its own rules, because this is probably the biggest change, and it's one that you just kind of glaze over if you don't really think about the impact of it. But for guidelines on outlier identification and trimming, see, the department requires that assessing officials now follow the IAAO standard on ratio studies, Appendix B, and then it changes it to the 13 version. And again, so I put them current and proposed, what IAAO says and what the DLGF current says. If they're serious about this, then we're going from, somewhere in the 30 to 50% range to somewhere in the 90% range. And again, that's not a change you make overnight. That's a lot of little appraisal projects you have to clean up over the years. Even IAAO talks about high variability and small sample sizes, and it describes a multi-year process. So to me, this isn't something that they're actually going to enforce. I think if they did, they would have major compliance problems, people trying to make knee-jerk reactions, trying to get values up substantially. I feel like they should be open to the math that would allow this to be a more regimented, stable process. I used our own data to just kind of show specifically, I think, what the DLGF is afraid of. And again, I don't think it's a founded fear. I think it's one if they really understood the math, they would just make guidelines to preclude this. But basically, here is our approved ratio study for residential property, and some vacant ones in there too. Again, any median that rounds to 0.9 or is over 0.9 is considered by the DLGF to be compliant. Anywhere where the upper confidence bound exceeds 0.9 is considered by the IAAO to not, it's not necessarily compliant. It could be a very weak compliance, depending on the span. The confidence actually tells you a lot about the nature of the compliance, not just whether it's a yes-no thing. And so what the DLGF doesn't like is, if you decrease this by 2%, take all of our assessments and just decrease our assessments by 2% and rerun the numbers, what happens? We'll look at WIA, Wabash, Fairfield. They have hundreds of sales, 600 sales, 800 sales. Making a change when you have that much sales automatically throws both standards out of compliance. It's because you have so much sales, you can easily say that that change is too low. Assessment shouldn't be that low for the populated areas. Then look at Wayne. Look at some of these other townships that have a handful of sales. It really doesn't move the needle much with respect to the confidence interval, still in compliance. And this holds true. The more you continue to decrease assessments, the populated areas fall more and more demonstrably out of compliance, while the smaller areas don't. Wayne is still compliant, 8% down from where it was with respect to the confidence interval, even though you can tell it's skewed to the low side. And I think that's what the DLGF doesn't want people to get away with. They don't want people to have assessments this low that they're justifying with confidence intervals. But that's a misinterpretation of what anyone is saying to do. In this situation, if there are some smaller jurisdictions with low sample size, what they're saying is you only let this situation persist while we're in communication about a plan to get it to a better place where it shows strong compliance. It's not supposed to be indefinite compliance toward the low side. That this situation can't persist indefinitely, for these small areas, and no one's saying it should. But I think that's a big misinterpretation that the DLGF has. They don't understand the math, and so they're worried about basically being forced to approve things they think are low, which is absurd considering they have no problem with us deleting half our sales and showing them a perfect ratio study. That does seem to be the one fudge factor they don't care. It's like they don't care at all about that one fudge factor, but they are so offended by this situation, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is kind of what I talked about after that chart that says when you don't approve or disapprove for non-compliance. This is from the IAAO 2013 Guide to Ratio Studies. If it fails to meet a particular point standard for 5 consecutive years, has a probability of less than 5% that compliance has been achieved, even if the confidence interval overlaps So it's saying, don't let this situation go on for 5 years, you know, make it better, but don't delete half your data and then not make it better either. There's got to be some happy compromise where we're honest about where we are and include the DLGF in our plans of how we're going to make it better. So I highly recommend that, again, it's a 60-page document that, especially for assessors, to be intimately familiar with it. There's a lot of really good common sense solutions. So that ends my part about what I thought was really important, the substantial changes with trimming policy, confidence intervals, and the written level of assessment for Indiana. It's huge for us to have a written level of assessment. It's important for businesses, assessors. I don't think that the DLGFs, you know, trust us to do the right thing when we want to do it as we want to do it is going to work long term. And so this is just more funny than anything. This is just another, actually Jeremy pointed this out. If the county, moving on to smaller changes, and we'll open it up for some discussion. I know there's been a lot of people watching on live stream who have questions, and we'll get into all that. This is like an example of like, this is what I would call a technical change that probably needs to be addressed. If the county assessor or township assessor, if any, modifies the data exported from the property tax system for the local ratio study classification,
What, I was wondering the same thing. I read it like 3 times. What are they trying to say?
I think they forgot the second half of that clause. But again, this is stuff that I'm sure they'll clarify whatever. I'm really concerned about the major stuff. But anyway, I think that's pretty much what I had as far as like a regimented kind of discussion goes. I do want to say that I am disappointed that I found out about this by accident. You know, at our district meeting, they just kind of mentioned that, oh yeah, we put these changes online. We were going to email them to you, but you know, I can't tell you how many people would be here if they're not on vacation right now. I feel like the 3-week public comment period is way too short for the nature of changes they're making. And the fact that they're not here to talk about this is a continuation of years of silence they've had on these topics. I feel like it's, you know, we can all read, you know, it says however you will use confidence intervals. You know, how many discussions are you going to have with someone about what that sentence means, you know, before it's just exhausting. Anyway, that's really what I had to say to the assessment community. I don't know to what extent anyone else has looked at these or had similar interpretations, but at this point, I kind of wanted to, you know, we've been collecting some questions from internet people. Jack, she'll be right back. So before we dive into those, maybe we'll give all of you who actually made the trip today the first crack at, does anyone want to stand on this soapbox or ask any questions or address another part? Because like I said, I know a lot of you guys are like, I see a lot of tax representatives who, they made some changes to the continuing education stuff that maybe you guys want to talk. I know that's probably the most tax rep effective thing, but yeah, anything really. Comments about this, other stuff? Okay.
I had in the actual manual on page 8, it gives the definition of sales price, and this is not on your topic, which I think is really something that we all should really think about. And I think your topic is the way of the future, and I think it's a transition for particularly very small counties who don't have expertise and don't have a lot of sales. Because the fewer sales you have in a county, the harder it is. It's extremely hard in a small county to do any of these statistics with any type of really confidence that you've got good data. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. The smaller the number of sales, the harder it is to meet the statistics, and the harder it is to judge your data by those sales, because you just don't have enough to say that you've got assessments that are you don't have enough sales to judge your assessments. But I think it is the way of the future. I think also a problem with the comparable intervals and with using multiple regression and using the more advanced methods of analysis is the cost, and the problem the DLGF gets into is that they've got to give a system that fits all. They've got to give a system that fits all sizes. And it's very, and I'm not defending what they're doing here, but I'm just saying that it's very hard to do that when they have such a broad range of counties and expertise in those counties and assessors and the whole 9 yards. It all fits in there. But on another subject, on the manual on page 8, it says the definition of sales price, and it says the actual amount of money exchanged for a unit of goods or services, whether or not established in a free and open market. Then it says an indicator of market value. It's a possible indicator of market value. The way that reads, I mean, I can see this going to IBTR and somebody saying, well, it's the sale price, it's the market value. That's not always true. And I think that they need to address that and even just put, could be an indicator of market value or a possible indicator of market value. Not that it is an indicator of market value.
Interesting. Well, you said two things there that I want to respond to. Great points, and I agree with them both. The part about the diversity of counties and making a policy that's going to fit all counties, I mean, that's true. As far as the sample size goes, not having sales, I mean, that's what's so great about a confidence interval. It'll tell you that. You'll see in the confidence interval that you have huge variation. You don't have enough sales. Your 95% confidence interval is not, it doesn't say much because it's so broad. And there's guidelines on what to do in those situations. They actually have an adjusted confidence interval based on variability and low sample size in the 2013 IAA Guide to Ratio studies. But getting on more to your point about the one-size-fits-all policy, that might not exist. That might be this white whale that we're never going to have one policy that works great for Marion and also works for some 20,000 parcel county that's all ag. And what we thought is, when we requested data from the DLGF for all counties to kind of get a handle on this, we find is there's probably like almost 10 counties, 9 or 10 counties that are between 50 and 80,000 parcels that probably have a lot in common. There's probably a bunch that are over like 100,000. There's not much in that 80 to 100, but there's a bunch over 100 that probably have a lot in common. And then maybe there's a stratum under 50,000 parcels where there's very small rural ones. Maybe those confidence interval guidelines vary depending on the composition of your county. Maybe the percent sales vary. If you have, like Tippecanoe or Hancock, or you have a lot of residential development and growth, you have a lot of residential commercial sales, you should see a very high percentage of sales use. Maybe that's not true with agricultural counties. Maybe for Tippecanoe it should be 85, 95%. Maybe in small rural county, it's probably dependent on the percentage of agricultural properties and corresponding sales you have, but that might be it. Maybe there is, that's something the DLGF says all the time, and to justify bad policies is, well, it has to work for everyone. And I don't know that that's true. I don't know why they can't make specific policies that match the composition of your county. The other thing you mentioned is, sale price equals market. And if you notice, in the reason for getting rid of confidence intervals, in one of them, they talk about reiterating, here we go. The reason they're remove confidence intervals based on incorrect use by some counties assessors specify the overall level of assessment should be 100%. What does that mean? 100% of what? 100% of sale price? 100% of indicators of value? I think we talked about legislative wording, and come on in. What the legislature says is being just as important as what they don't say. I feel like the market value in use definition we have, at least with respect to IBTR in the court, the in use is not to be ignored. It is different than market value in exchange. Like you said, it depends on, sometimes the market value in use and the market value in exchange are identical. Sometimes they're worlds apart. And I hate to say this in front of so many tax reps, but when you don't recognize the in-use caveat, when you assign nothing to that definition, and you make a methodology based entirely on unadjusted sale prices, when there is a difference between market value in use and market value in exchange, for example, like a hotel or apartment building or something that has inflated personal property or business value conflated with the transaction, what you're doing is making a payday for somebody, for a tax rep to come in and say that is the going concern value, not the fee simple market value in use. And a lot of indefensible appeals are the result of attributing nothing to the in-use caveat, except for what might it sell for. That's another reason why the commercial industrial tax bases use even a lesser percentage of sales than their already dismal residential counterparts. But anyway, sorry to get off topic. I thought both of those were excellent points, and I do agree that really defining market value in use, and how it relates to market value in exchange, and what you do when there's a difference is very important. Because just ignoring it, again, ignoring the caveat is not something the courts will do. And having a definition of value and a methodology to reach that is not synonymous with the courts upheld creates bad blood between the assessment community and IBTR, where it's really a DLGF created problem. Jackie, we were just kind of taking questions from the audience before we opened it up to the people from keyboards. Yeah, anyone out here first before we? It's a lot easier to ask questions when you're just typing in the keyboard, but really feel free. Does anyone think I'm crazy? Like, are all about these middle numbers? Do not like confidence intervals? You know, I definitely didn't invite people here who I thought would agree with me. I invited everybody to kind of get the full range of perspectives. I haven't had anyone articulate a good reason to ignore confidence intervals, but again, I was hoping DLGF would come, but anyone out here before we do it online, folks?
I have a question. It says if the DLGF is going to mix confidence intervals, what type of measure are they proposing to test assessment level compliance?
They have
Can you
in,
repeat that question, please?
yes, if they're asking if the DLGF is not going to use confidence intervals, what are they going to use? And as I kind of touched on earlier, speaking to you internet people, thank you so much for tuning in. We want to make sure the DLGF has good rules on the books, but they haven't been enforced. Even though they do right now, they haven't been enforcing them in the past few years. So even though we do have confidence intervals intertwined with 50 IAC as they should be, the DLGF has been using the middle number. The middle assessment, regardless of skewness, regardless of variability, wherever that middle number is going to be what accepts or rejects that part of the ratio study. And obviously the big difference is the median ratio is just one number in the data set. The confidence interval is a representation of the entire data set. One is much more reliable and stable than the other. Creating knee-jerk reactions where you're chasing around some middle number every year based on a different pool of sales creates a lot of instability if that's what your actual process is doing. And I guess I was doing the ratio study process prior to the incorporation of confidence intervals, and kind of run it both way each time, and it's a much better process when you're not chasing around this middle number, when you're looking at entire data sets over time. But to answer the question directly, the middle number, the middle ratio is what they intend on using.
I have two questions that I think kind of go together. What does the ICA say about these changes, and do we know who the DLGF talked to regarding the changes?
Oh, I will have to lean on the audience for some of these. To repeat the question, let me know if I get this right. Does the ICAA have an opinion, or have an opinion about the changes, any of these changes, and who did the DLGF consult with prior to penning these changes? Is that about right? Is anyone here from the ICAA, the Assessor Association? I think that speaks volumes. I know some of them wanted to come and are online right now. If they want to chime in, happy to read their answer. I don't know if the ICAA was involved in this. I did write a letter to members of the ICAA expressing the concerns I expressed here today and urging them to have a discussion after they had a chance to read them. And after not receiving follow-up, I scheduled this meeting because it wasn't my impression that the ICAA was going to take a stand on any of this. So I felt someone had to. But no, if I felt that they had a good handle on it or they had opinions, that I certainly would have.
Yeah, I was surprised when you sent this because it was never even brought up at our, we had a board meeting. And this was never even skimmed over, touched, or anything at that board meeting. So I don't know if they can talk to anybody. Of course, I'm kind of an outcast on the board because I tend to ask a lot of questions. So I was really surprised when you sent this, and then there was no comment basically from the executive board.
Yeah, I feel like that's problematic too. Something I've said in a lot of my correspondence is, these changes, just getting rid of confidence intervals, not addressing the churning policy. I mean, who are the benefactors of this? it's not the jurisdiction, it's not the people who are ultimately gonna be spending the tax dollars, not the assessors community, it's the contractors who have six-figure contracts to perpetuate a certain level of mediocrity. You know, if you can get $100,000, get the county to do most of the work and produce a report that, you know, their software is required to produce anyway, and that is a great business. And I can't necessarily fault anyone in that situation from a business standpoint, but yeah, it seems like a lot of the people in the association have contractors doing a lot of this work for them as well, which is concerning, because like I said, they have a lot, the contractor community has a lot to lose by having real trimming policy standards. It's a lot of appraisal work that they may have to do, or the county may have to do. But yeah, I appreciate your comments. I was surprised that they did not seem aware of or interested in commenting publicly on any of this. And I don't know if they were part of the decision-making process to begin with. I would be surprised that any assessor would want to delete so much useful tools from 50 IAC. But
I have one about software. It says if the DLGF is setting standards on software, why don't we include a built-in ratio study functionality in that software?
Without 50 IAC up, there are extensive software requirements in 50 IAC that require a great deal of standard reports to be automated, and I believe including the ratio study. I believe the ability to produce a ratio study is part of 50 IAC. And again, a major conflict of interest for you know, any contractor who provides software that's supposed to automate this process. If they have a consulting division, you know, that's out there charging six figures to do what their software is supposed to automate, that's a major conflict. They can't provide the best software and training on how to use it without putting the other division out of a job. And I think that is a major problem. We've had automated ratio studies for a few years, and it's an integral part of being independent is having that math automated for you and formatted for you on the fly. And honestly, I think that, I guess my opinion is it is pretty much automated. It's just many counties choose not to take advantage of some of their software features in lieu of hiring a contractor or doing some, like, we don't use that feature of our software. We have our own home-built system that does that as well. But yeah, I would think that any 50 IAC compliant camera system should produce a ratio study and store sale information. And you have to look at that litany of requirements, software requirements under 50 IAC. Is that it from the online folks? Yeah. Thanks a lot for tuning in, online folks. Just if you have questions, keep posting them. And anyone else in the room? Yeah.
How does this stop it?
Oh, yeah, good question. So really, like I said, DLGF is aware of a lot of things we've brought up here because we've been talking to them about it for a long time. And their main argument is this is a Tippecanoe problem. It's not you're the only county that has this problem. And I don't know that that's false. It's concerning if it's true, because if you only have one county concerned with candidly telling you where you're at and making a plan to get better, that means you have 90-some counties that are coasting, deleting sales. And I would hope that's not true. I would hope that everyone has a vested interest in, you know, written level of assessment and policies to move forward, like you said. As far as what is this meeting going to do, my plan was to take everyone's comments and compile them in one place and say, based on this meeting, for these people who showed up, here's the questions. And we have, I guess that's a lot of what we've been trying to do, is include more people in the discussion. I'm really easy to ignore, you know, and I tend to forget about my causes sometimes. But if a lot of us, you know, are, you know, if it does mean something to a lot of us, it's going to be really hard to ignore. I also feel that, you know, a lot of us have things we're not happy with in government that we're kind of consigned to not be able to really do much change. We just kind of accept it. And I don't know where everyone's line in the sand is, but, you know, we have Purdue University in our backyard. Purdue University has a group called StatCom, Statistics in the Community, professors and grad students in statistics who do free work for government and consult government. I just can't imagine a system where, on one hand, you have, you know, IU and Purdue and these major research universities have tons of academic and statistical horsepower. You have IAAO, and my line in the sand is deleting math from 50 IAC. I mean, that's pretty egregious given where we are and how far we've come. So my plan was just to compile everyone's thoughts and hopefully express that it really isn't just a Tippecanoe problem. It's not having a written level of assessment beyond the DLGF will do what the DLGF wants to do, is like an everyone problem. And I feel like a lot of assessors are trying to do more of their own work, and as they do that, I think it's, for those of us who are independent, we want to make sure they have the best tools available to them, and they're not going to be stifled into some contract they can't get out of by literally just deleting the best tools from it. So I mean, honestly, I think that this is just, it might just be another document for them to ignore as they push through these rules while everyone's on vacation, but at least we can say we tried and we said we thought was right, you know. Or again, I didn't invite you guys here to agree with me. That really, it should be an open discussion. You know, maybe you're like, this guy's crazy. We need to get back to our middle numbers or whatever it is. But yeah, good question. I wish I had a better answer. Like, this is how we're gonna stop it. But I mean, they can do whatever they want. Like they've often said, they're their rules, and they'll make them up as they go. Unfortunately. Sure.
I think these are all excellent points. And I think in order to move forward, I think our education process the education process came to an absolute standstill in Indiana beyond getting your level 3. I mean, outside of those classes that IAA offers that the DLGF reimburses for, pays for, we're just at a standstill. I mean, our education opportunities outside of IAA classes are ridiculous. You know, you go to conference after conference and the options just are either repetitive or they aren't relevant, in my opinion. So I would love to see, along with moving things forward, some simple education on what the terminology is and how these work. I think that a lot of times, especially in small counties or where you haven't had the opportunity to take these classes, the idea of doing some of this is kind of scary or whatever, but when you really get into the nuts and bolts of it, we're already doing a lot of it. And if you have the opportunity to go get quality education, it's not that difficult. And you know, we have a lot of qualified assessors that are stuck because they don't have the tools, or they don't even understand that it's not really that difficult from what they're already doing. I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the solution is deleting all math from 50 IAC. No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that brings me to, sorry, I'll get to you in a second, Jenny. I do want to respond to that. That brings me to a point that I overlooked and meant to say. Part of what I want to talk about today are not just the rules they are pushing through, but what isn't on there. There's a whole thing about incompetent tax reps and incompetent people we can bring these people to light and get them stripped of their certifications, you know, definitions of how incompetent people act, the fallacious arguments they make, etc. One thing that I think we need, I can't think of a situation where I really felt someone was so incompetent I was going to spend my time trying to prove it and like get them stripped of their license, you know. But one thing that I do constantly see, and I think you touched on it without saying it, is there is an absurd, obvious, and reprehensible conflict of interest with our education and money. It's so crazy. I don't know how many in the assessment community got the invitation to the Nexus user group conference, which are indistinguishable. Really, we're paying DLGF and contractors to teach us stuff that if they effectively passed on knowledge to the assessment community, would work themselves out of jobs. You know, if you had these contractors showing up teaching people how to value property, how to list property, how to use the software they're required to provide under contract, they would slowly lose contracts. It'd be like us. You know, Jim taught me how to do it. He got that year's paycheck and he was done. And for some people, that's an honest day's work. But if you're trying to increase your revenue every year, you know, you don't want to be giving away your knowledge. And if the association and DLGF is leaning heavily on what these contractors tell them, if they're the main benefactors of these conferences, yeah, we're in this, like you said, treading water, taking the same classes by the same people and who's the benefactor of that? The contractors who we don't know how to do our jobs, and they can bill us 6 figures to do them for
And
us.
they're terms, they're just assessment terms that as I've gone through my career in this, that I used to think were, oh, that's so scary, and I think that's been propagated, and it's not scary, they're just certain things that once you're like, oh, this is how I do it, I can do that. So, and I think that that's been propagated over and over, and then we get kind of silly little classes that don't do you any good.
So I'm not a statistician, I'm not a mathematician, that's not my strong suit, and a lot of the math that I analyze, I've learned how to read output tables. I don't know how to do the math, and that's okay, because statistics software is easy. Like I said, our CAMA systems may be required to do a lot of this math for us. They're deleting that requirement, but a lot of the stuff that this data and stats we're talking about, it's really easy to produce these. And I think you're right, people get intimidated if you've never used them, never taken a class, you see these numbers, oh my God, this is over my head. It really isn't. You kind of load this standard report, you click a few buttons and hit run, and it runs you these, and you just have to learn how to read them. So yeah, I think quality education is huge. I would love to see these standards at least disclose conflict of interest. If you're going to teach a class, I'm not saying contractor can't teach a class, but at least disclose that you make your living selling the information you're supposedly giving away for free. I think that's important to at least know, and I personally would like to just see it barred. Like if you have a conflict of interest in teaching a class, let's find someone who doesn't. I don't think that there's any effort made to find practical teachers at any of these conferences. Like I said, and if you look at how we spend our money at conference, it's even more obvious. I encourage all the assessors to take a hard look at how these conferences are funded as we move forward. But anyway, thank you so much here. I totally forgot about the whole educational thing. I would love to see some, instead of, pages and pages talking about tax record and competence, how about some Proctor standards as well? Jeannie.
Thanks. As the assessors here know, I'm the coordinator for IAAO for the education that comes into the state. I'd just like to say a big amen and jump on Sherry's back, piggyback on what she said, not jump on her back, but piggyback on what she said. It's just like when we started going to market value. Assessors knew nothing about it, they learned. They can learn the next step. They can be elevated to the next step. There's no reason, in my opinion, to take away the possibility of using that next step and of obtaining that next goal from the information that we have. I don't think the majority of the assessors use it, but I think that they could and they can and they will. The only way they're going to get equitable assessments without trimming sales excessively is to get into learning how do you fix the assessments. You got a jurisdiction that the sales don't match, then there are ways to fix it. Not in an overnight process by trimming, but by looking at your neighborhoods, by revisiting these properties, by re-stratifying, and again, if you've got the sales to do it. If you don't, it's another ballgame, but that's not a discussion for this group. But I would, we really truly need to get the education out there. Even if we haven't to, in our districts, take control of that on our district meeting level, which we can do. So it's very important, and because no matter what the standards say you can do, if your assessors don't have any idea what it means, it's not going to do them any good. So that's all I have.
Yeah, I agree with all that, Jenny. I think a lot of it goes back to having a good, basically, support group that can help you get off contractor life support for the counties that do want to try it by themselves. And myself and a lot of other assessors are more than willing to help people run preliminary ratio studies, do it by themselves before they get to that, and then determine if they need to hire a contractor or not. But yeah, local, maybe you're right. Maybe the solution is, what we talk about is instead of lectures, workshops. Let's bring our laptops and our data sets. Let's start running some standard reports, and let's start doing the work at these classes. and leaving with an idea of how to finish out the year closing the year process, finishing out your ratio study, instead of taking tidbits but not leaving with the confidence to actually do it. It's really hard to walk someone through a mathematical process in a class and then have them go back weeks later and attempt to do it by themselves without, it's something you have to work on together. I helped, when my first deputy Katie became Hancock County Assessor, we worked a lot together on her first ratio study, and it was a learning curve for her, but she got it done faster than I did. She got it approved faster than I did. She didn't use quite as many sales. She's going to work on that, but it was a good process for us to kind of figure it out together in a new county, and I'm confident that if she can do it, like you said, a lot of assessors can, who just might be intimidated, not have the tools. And yeah, good comments. Got the room for 45 minutes. Anyone from online or? They want to talk about like a good thing they noticed, something they feel is positive to these changes, that they're happy. All right. Well, like I said, we will compile all of this stuff into one kind of document that adds everything we talked about with education and the other comments from the online folks to one document in conjunction with this stuff that we've already sent to DLGF many times, and send it out to anyone on that email list, and include anyone on that email list in the sign-up sheet or who puts their email on the chat online. Happy to send you guys information as this develops. Is anyone here from the legislature? You did? A lot of those folks want to be kept up to date but couldn't be here. I know they're very busy. I apologize for the short notice, and I'm super impressed that this many people showed up. Like I said, we're just trying to make sure that someone talked about this during the public comment period. One thing that the DLGF has said many times, sorry, I'll get to you back there. Are you from the legislature?
I am.
Oh, awesome.
There's a senator that was here earlier.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I hope that, one of the reasons we really want to invite the legislature is Wes Bennett has said to us many times about the confidence intervals, this is a legislative problem. And to me, it's a cop-out. It isn't a legislative problem. You can see he writes the rules, and they can use whatever math and science they want. But one thing that would preclude this is the legislature taking a stand and saying, like, no, 50 IAC will not defy our statistics department, IAAL. We're gonna protect some of this math and science in code, because 50 IAC can't trump code. And I think that's what they're saying, is if the legislature saw the merit to some of this, even just putting some protectionist wording to ensure this was a mathematically and statistically sound process, it would preclude a lot of these find and delete math from 50 IAC. And so it wouldn't take a lot of code. We actually have some ideas, and would love to talk further with some of the legislatures who couldn't be here. We've had a lot of side conversations, but our recourse, if this does get hammered through, is to then pursue legislative fixes, which could then trump it. But I apologize for not getting to you guys sooner when you were still here, but much appreciate you guys making the time. I know it was short notice. Did you have anything to say?
No.
Thank you very much.
You're very, what can I say? It's very thorough. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, so thorough that the audience is questionless. Okay, we'll just do a quick debriefing then, and we'll let you all on your day. As you know, a lot of us in the assessment community especially, whenever we deal with DLGF policy and Indiana code, stuff like that, it brings out our innate desire to drink. So let's just say I like between 1:45 and 2. If you guys want to meet up, have a beer, and talk more about this on a more personal level, we'll be at 644 Main Street, DT Kirby's. And anyone who wants to continue the discussion more candidly, privately, feel free to come join us. I know a lot of you traveled far to be here, so get your money's worth out of Lafayette. And like I said, we'll keep you guys apprised of what goes on. And thank you everyone who tuned in online. I hope you guys had a good streaming experience.